Welcome to Sacred Stories, Everyday Lives. I am Adeline St. Clair. As we continue this series on the battles between good and evil, we are moving into a story where the conflict is not between strangers or enemies, but between two men who stand close to one another. This is a story about leadership, fear, and what happens when insecurity is allowed to sit in positions of authority. This is the story of David and Saul. Saul is the first king of Israel. He is chosen, anointed, and entrusted with responsibility. His rise to power is not accidental. It is deliberate and ordained by God through the prophet Samuel. Saul begins his reign with humility, restraint, and a genuine desire to lead well. The people support him. God equips him. Everything appears aligned. David enters the story much later. He is young, the youngest of 8 brothers, overlooked and not considered a threat. He is a shepherd, someone whose life unfolds far from the corridors of power. When David is anointed as the future king, it is done quietly, almost privately. Samuel goes to Jesse's house in Bethlehem, and while everyone expects one of the older, stronger brothers to be chosen, God selects David. But David does not take the throne. He does not campaign for influence or position himself against Saul. He returns to the fields, and he waits. And for a time, the two men coexist peacefully. But something shifts. David defeats Goliath, the Philistine giant who has terrorized Israel's army. It is a moment of national relief, of sudden victory. The people rejoice. Songs are sung in the streets. Praise spreads across the kingdom. And the lyrics are telling. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. It is a celebration, not a political statement. But Saul hears it differently. Scripture tells us, Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. That sentence lands in Saul's spirit like a wound. Not because David has done anything wrong, but because Saul perceives his own worth being diminished by someone else's success. And this is where the story turns. Saul's fear does not begin with David's doing anything wrong. It begins with comparison, with the belief that there is only room for one person to be valued, and if David is praised, then Saul must be losing ground. Scripture tells us that from that day forward, Saul kept a close eye on David, not to mentor him, not to celebrate him, but to measure him. His fear began to reframe his reality. And where David once appeared loyal, he now appears to Saul as threatening. Where their partnership once seemed possible, suspicion takes its place. Where humility once guided Saul, paranoia begins to settle in. Although Saul still holds power, he is no longer at peace within it. This is one of the most sobering aspects of the story. Evil does not enter through cruelty or chaos. It enters through fear left unattended. Through insecurity that is never confronted, never named, never brought into the light. Saul begins to act defensively towards David. He throws a spear at him while he is playing music to calm him, not once, but twice. He sends David into dangerous military situations, hoping harm will come to him indirectly. Saul's authority becomes a weapon. His position, which was meant to protect and serve the people, becomes a tool for eliminating perceived threats. And David, who has done nothing to provoke this response, becomes a target simply for existing in favor. He is hunted, pursued, forced into hiding. Not because he rebelled, but because someone in power felt threatened by him. This is where the battle between good and evil becomes painfully, recognizably human. David has opportunities to retaliate. More than once, Saul is vulnerable, sleeping in a cave, unguarded, within reach. David's men urge him to act. They tell him this is divine justice, that God has delivered his enemy into his hands. But David refuses. Not because Saul is blameless, Saul has clearly crossed moral boundaries, but because David understands something deeper about the nature of goodness. He refuses to let fear determine his character. He refuses to become the kind of person who uses power to eliminate threats, even when he would be justified in doing so. David chooses restraint over revenge. He separates Saul's wrongdoing from Saul's identity. He acknowledges the failure without becoming consumed by bitterness. In one encounter, David cuts off a corner of Saul's robe to prove he could have killed him, but chose not to. He calls out to Saul afterward, holding up the fabric, saying, "See, my father, I will not harm you." This choice is not passive, however, it is costly. David spends years running, hiding in caves, gathering a band of outcasts and refugees. He loses stability, comfort, and certainty, not because he did wrong, but because he refused to become like the one who hunted him. He could have seized power. He could have justified violence as self-defense. He could have convinced himself that eliminating Saul was the only way forward. But he does not. And in that refusal, something is preserved. Not just David's life, but his integrity, his ability to lead without corruption, his capacity to hold power without letting it corrupt him. This is where the story reaches into our own lives, because many of us have experienced what it is like to be harmed by someone in power who is afraid. Someone who feels threatened by growth, difference, or change. Someone whose insecurity reshapes the environment around them. Fear in leadership often looks defensive, controlling, reactive, punitive. It reshapes systems. It distorts relationships. It turns authority into something corrosive rather than constructive. And on the other side of that fear are people like David. Individuals who did not ask for the conflict, but must decide how they will respond to it. Will they mirror the behavior? Will they become defensive, reactive, and controlling in return? Or will they choose a different path? David's story reminds us that goodness is not proven by dominance, but by restraint. That refusing to harm does not mean refusing to act, but choosing carefully how and when to act. It teaches us that integrity under pressure is not about being passive. It is about refusing to let someone else's brokenness determine who we become. Saul, tragically, never confronts his fear. It consumes him. He loses clarity of purpose. He consults mediums and spiritists in desperation. He isolates himself from the people who once supported him. And eventually, his authority collapses under the weight of his own insecurity. He dies in battle, not because David defeated him, but because he defeated himself. You see, good and evil collide here not through weapons, but through choices. It was the choice to let fear rule, the choice to let integrity remain intact, the choice to trust that goodness does not need to rush to its own defense. If you are navigating conflict with someone who holds power over you, if you have felt targeted simply for being who you are, if you are wrestling with the temptation to protect yourself by becoming harder, colder, more defensive than you want to be, this story is for you. It reminds us that evil often seeks to provoke reaction, to pull us into its rhythm, to convince us that survival requires surrendering our values. But David shows us another way, a way that waits, a way that resists becoming what it opposes, a way that trusts that goodness does not need to defend itself through force. The battle between good and evil is not always about who wins quickly. Sometimes it is about who remains whole. Thank you for spending this time with me today. May these sacred stories continue to meet you in the ordinary moments of your life, especially in those moments when you are deciding who you will become under pressure. You have the power to choose restraint, and that choice shapes everything. If this story touched your heart, bless us with a like. Do not be afraid to share this video with someone in your life that may need this message. Share your own experience with us in the comments. Your testimony may help someone else turn to Christ. Subscribe if you would like to hear more stories. New episodes will be shared every Sunday, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 12 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. I hope to see you again.